Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hello, Latasha. Thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm so happy that you could come on and do this interview with me today.
You are very welcome. I'm happy to be here as well.
Awesome. Well, tell us about yourself and the work that you do.
Yes, I am a licensed professional counselor and a supervisor, clinical supervisor in the Lawrenceville, Georgia area. Mm-hmm. I also do some professional coaching for clinicians that want to develop a sound, balanced practice. I also do some organizational training, and I'm an educator as well. So I do some teaching also. So I wear lots of hats.
You really do. Wow, that's a mouthful of stuff that you do. Wow, it must be pretty exhausting.
No, I'm pretty balanced. I do a little of this and a little of that and not a lot of anything. So I balance it out pretty well.
Okay, and what drives the passion behind all of the many different hats that you wear?
Well, I would say the passion is derived from wanting to see people live their best life and making sure that clinicians and clients honor each part of themselves. And so sometimes what will happen is that we'll focus on one area and we'll do really well in that one area. Mm-hmm. But I'm more concerned and more passionate about making sure that we honor all parts of ourselves.
Okay. All right. That sounds awesome. And that's a perfect segue into our topic for discussion today. Today you came on to talk about boundaries.
Yes.
All right. Tell us about boundaries and why they are so important.
Yes, so boundaries are near and dear to my heart. I have a book that I authored called The Dumping Ground, and I feel like I'm an expert in boundary setting at this point because I was horrible at it for a very long time, and that's what prompted me to write my book. Boundaries are essential for just everyday living. You cannot be successful. You cannot achieve any goals if you're unable to set healthy boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so for people who don't know what healthy boundaries look like, can you give us an idea of what healthy boundaries are and how we go about establishing or setting those?
Yes. So healthy boundaries are really going to be based on each individual person. But if I would give an example of healthy boundaries, I'll use a good example, finances. If you are not able to set good boundaries around finances, you will end up in a lot of financial turmoil. Boundary setting is important in finances because if you're not able to manage your money, you will not be able to pay your bills. You may not be able to plan for the future. And so understanding the importance of boundary setting in finances will help you achieve a lot of the goals that you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to buy a house or any investments, anything around finances, you have to understand boundaries and limits as far as spending.
Right. So it sounds like it's pretty much limit setting for things that you value, right? Because you don't, the things that you value, you want to hold close to you. You want to protect that. You want to provide an environment for it to flourish, as opposed to if you're not protecting it, anyone and everyone can have access to it and trample all over it, essentially.
That is correct.
And I feel like there's some serious consequences for people who don't set limits, not just with finances, but across the board. What are some of the personal consequences that someone undergoes if they don't establish healthy boundaries with money, relationships, with themselves, and maybe even, family or work or things like that?
Well, I'm pretty transparent in my book, so I'll just use some of the examples that consequences that I faced when I wasn't able to set boundaries. As far as your emotions, not being able to set boundaries will cause a lot of stress and anxiety. Wanting to please people and not the inability to say no causes you to overextend yourself as far as your time is concerned, as far as your priorities. And a lot of times you just don't get anything done. So being able to say no is very important. But when you're unable to say no, those consequences just cause a lot of emotional stress.
Okay. What are some, I'm wondering, what leads to a person being a poor boundary setter? If there's certain characteristics, if there was, maybe a certain way that a person was raised, or if there was something that perhaps that they were exposed to that they feel like they can't say no, or they can't set limits with other people.
Yes, I definitely think family of origin plays a big role in boundary setting. If I had to think about an example of someone who during a certain developmental age did not learn how to set boundaries or didn't have the proper structure, if you continue down that road as an adult, you're not going to have the structure because you weren't taught that. Another characteristic that shows up as it pertains to boundary setting is fear. A lot of times being fearful of the outcome of saying no causes individuals not to want to set good boundaries. And then just not having a healthy self-worth and being able to honor those parts that are important to you could also cause those consequences of not being able to set boundaries.
Yeah, I can imagine. And, not having a healthy self-worth, I feel like it's the biggest thing. And also, it definitely resonated when you talked about fear. And I know that with a lot of clients that I work with, they have a fear of abandonment.
Yes.
So if you say no, or if you tell a person that they can't do something or be a certain way, that there's a fear that you might lose that person. And that might come from an earlier experiences of, maybe a parent not being around, or inconsistent parenting. And so I'm wondering if maybe you could talk about that, the fear of abandonment due to inconsistencies that they've had in their life, and how people can sort of address that and get over that, or, move through that, so to speak.
Yes. Well, I think the first step is having some awareness of that fear resonating with that person. A lot of times clients are not aware of where that came from. So being able to help them understand that although they had those abandonment issues in their childhood, that they are an adult now and they are able to work through some of those areas. The second thing I would say, after they have the awareness, I would want them to look at just challenging that fear, asking themselves questions regarding that particular situation. What would happen if they made that choice to set the boundary, and looking at the worst case scenario and helping them understand that if they can conquer that worst case scenario, they can conquer that fear. So just getting them to really look at the fear head on and empowering them to be able to make a different choice, and also showing them some of the benefits of setting that boundary. A lot of times, if our clients are unable to set boundaries, they're having a lot of turmoil in their life. They're having poor relationships and, problems with eating and problems with, keeping jobs and, not having a good, healthy self-worth as it pertains to, friendships and just a lot of social issues. So they if they're setting goals and they want to have some success in their life, they're going to have to look at how to manage that fear.
Mm. You also mentioned low self-worth, and I was curious if you can talk about that a little bit more, about what that is and how that looks like and how that sort of plays out in being able to set limits.
Yeah, so I find that if a client has not been validated, it goes again back to that family of origin. Our family of origin is the first of many relationships that we'll have in life. And so if those relationships are not balanced as far as, healthy validation and being able to pull out those strengths in a person, they will continue to try to get validation in ways that are unhealthy. And so and if they're unable to do that, they will continue to feel rejected and continue to look for unhealthy ways to get that validation, not knowing that is really decreasing their self-worth. It's not really helping them, because they have to keep doing something to feel good about themselves. And a lot of times when they're unable to set boundaries, they're attempting to please others. And really what they're doing is setting up unhealthy relationships.
I see. And that makes a lot of sense. And so, a lot of times it's often harder for us to tell people no that are closest to us, such as family, perhaps a romantic love interest, even children. What comes to mind is like a screaming child in the grocery store that's having a tantrum because, mom won't let them have candy. And, so I'm just wondering, what are some ways in which we can effectively tell people no?
Yeah, that word no is difficult for a lot of individuals, especially if it's a hard no.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that I talk to my clients about is determining what they can do. So if they're unable to say no, depending on what someone is wanting them to do, just determine what kind of works for them. So perhaps they can do a piece of the request instead of overextending themselves. Or maybe they can say, you know what, I'm unable to do that now, but let me get back to you so I can really look at my calendar. So a lot of times the no is a knee-jerk reaction, and the client or the individual doesn't really want to do it. So I would say give yourself some time to think about it. One of the things I have clients do is I help them create a boundary list. And these are a list of questions that they would ask themselves before making a decision. So and they kind of generate the questions themselves. So the questions is based on their values. So if they have a relationship with God or higher power, one of the questions may be, does this situation or this event that I'm going to do impact my relationship with my higher power? Another question I would have them ask is, do I really want to do it? And so these are yes or no questions. And once they're looking at some of these questions that they've developed for themselves, they will then determine if they are going to set a boundary in that particular area. So the questions really slows down their thought process so they can determine what's best for them. So then they're honoring every piece of their time. They're honoring their ability to say no. They're honoring relationships. If relationships aren't healthy, they're setting those limits so they can determine if they want to spend time with that person. And then when family is concerned, since that's the toughest relationship to set boundaries in, they are not hurting their family members' feelings, because one of the reasons why families are so difficult is because you don't want to hurt your family. So you're gently setting a boundary, but you're still making sure that you're honoring yourself. And then sometimes you have to be very direct and know that you could lose relationships. And if individuals are not willing to accept your boundaries, sometimes the unfortunate relationship, the relationship will have to end at times. So being okay with that as well.
And I hear people say that a lot in terms of, I don't want to tell someone no or set a limit, with my family member, because I don't want to hurt them, or I don't want to disrespect them or make them feel bad in some way, so it's a lot about putting, the way someone else feels before your own feelings, and also, making assumptions on behalf of someone else that they're going to feel bad if you don't do this, that, and the other thing.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering if you can talk about that a little bit more, maybe putting someone else's feelings before your own, or that concept that, someone's automatically going to be hurt or be in a certain type of disposition if we don't do what they ask us to do all the time.
Yeah, that's a great point, Nat. I think that from my experience, there is a lot of irrational thoughts, because the fear generates those irrational thoughts, and you're always assuming the worst, or you already have the answers for someone. So one of the things that I would do is have them challenge their thoughts. If they don't have any data to support that thought, then they need to reject it. And one of the things they can do is they can ask their family member a question before assuming. And so really we just kind of tease out, whose thought is this? Where's this thought deriving from, to make sure they're not living in some past situation, or they're saying, well, the last time I tried to say no, this person got upset. Well, that was the last time. This time you're going to honor yourself and still set that boundary, because you're just as important as the other person. So teaching them to value themselves just as much as they are valuing their job or this other person is very important as well.
And I'm wondering too, is there any work around having them sit with feelings of disappointment, or having them sit with, people acting out and having a tantrum, essentially?
Yeah, sometimes these boundary situations and violations don't always end well, especially in romantic relationships. If you are trying to set a limit with a partner, in your fear of, okay, am I going to lose this relationship? And some of that disappointment from, perhaps the last relationship didn't work out, and so that's why I don't set boundaries. Is still being able to honor yourself, and talking about the relationship aspects. If that person is unwilling to set a limit and honor your limits, is that a relationship you really want to be in long term? Because eventually you're going to have to set a boundary. So really just talking about the healthy aspects of the relationship, and making sure that the person understands that they have a right to set a boundary.
Sure. And for those people who may be wondering, or they're just not sure, what does a healthy relationship look like?
A healthy relationship has a lot of good dynamics, but one of the characteristics in a healthy relationship would be able to express how you feel without a person minimizing your thoughts and telling you that that's not true. I would say another healthy characteristic in a relationship is being able to have someone listen, and you feel like you're heard in that relationship, and your thoughts are honored, and that person, perhaps even if they don't have the answers, they're willing to ask you how can they support you in that matter or in that situation. So it's going to be a relationship that's based on communication that you can work through, and that everyone's feelings are honored and everyone's feelings are important.
Good. Yeah. And, I want to take a step back for a minute because we all have, culture specific norms that we have to follow, right? In terms of, it might be honoring your parents, and respecting your parents, or this is my man, and so I have to do certain things to kind of please my man, and these are just kind of things that have been ingrained in us, maybe via culture, the culture of being a woman, maybe the culture of being a Black woman, maybe as the culture of being an American woman, or whatever it may be. Can you talk about, because I have a lot of clients that, fall into different cultures such as Trinidad, Dominican, or, various other cultures where they feel like they can't say no to their parents, or they have to support people, and they maybe have to live at a disadvantage so that their family or their spouse or someone else can live in a better way, and have all of their needs met. So therefore, they're putting themselves at a disadvantage. I'm wondering if you can address the cultural aspect of it and how that kind of comes into play when addressing a situation such as this.
Yeah. So I like you, I have lots of clients that are struggling with the culture in the U.S. and then honoring their parents because they still have cultural norms that they need to abide by. And so really, I hold the space for that type of dialogue. We talk about what pieces of their culture they want to continue to honor and what pieces of their culture don't work for them based on where they're at. A lot of my clients are not particularly happy with the rigid boundaries. So some cultures have very rigid boundaries and a lot of dynamics that limit our clients from being able to move forward. And so on the flip side of not setting boundaries, there is an aspect of boundaries where they're too rigid and they cause additional fear and anxiety. So, I talk to my clients about, for you to get your ideal life and still honor your parents and honor yourself, what can you do to make sure both sides are honored? Mm-hmm. And we just kind of walk through that process. It's not an easy process to say, I'm going to reject my culture, but also the person and the clients have to make sure that, they are living the best life for them as well. So we just kind of talk about ways that they can move forward and also still respect their parents, but make sure that they are doing the things that they need to do to honor themselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I want to take a step back for a minute because there's a lot of people who have trouble with setting boundaries or setting limits or saying no to people, but they're not necessarily aware of that particular problem. All they may be aware of is that they are tired or they feel like their relationships are all functioning in a certain way that may not be helpful for them. How can that person come to terms or come to the understanding that they may have a problem with, limit setting or boundary setting or what have you, if they don't necessarily have enough insight to know quite what the problem is?
Well, I think what happens, and I'm sure you can attest to this, when, our clients come in, they are sharing those consequences with us, perhaps, lack of sleep or, health and illness problems, overweight. And we're hearing a lot of the consequences. And once we begin to hear the consequences, we then kind of peel back the onion to help them identify, most areas of their life are running the same. There's no limits. Typically, if there's not a limit in one area, there's probably not a limit in the other area. So a lot of times it would be good if, these individuals get to a point where they are unable to figure it out. And so then they're coming in and we're sharing with them, how structure would look and how structure would help them. And then they're able to have some of those aha moments, because at this point they want to set limits, but they just really don't know how. So you're right, the awareness is not there. They don't really know how to get themselves out of the mess that they created. And so they really need support around looking at some of those areas and just starting to set some limits.
Okay, that sounds great. And then, the other piece that I want to touch on, you had talked before about, excuse me, about us having to potentially let some relationships go, once we start working on ourselves and making ourselves emotionally more healthy and we start valuing ourselves more, that we may have to let some relationships go that aren't working for us. And if that's the case, how do we come to terms with having to do something such like that?
Yeah. I'll just use a transparent moment. I've had to have some conversations with, some of my girlfriends and really just talk about some of the things that I needed in the relationship that I wasn't getting. And after I had that conversation and the person understood or said they understood, when the results didn't change, I had to make some decisions. And so although those conversations are hard, I think being really honest and really just honoring yourself, if you have an open relationship with someone and you feel like you can communicate, once you've communicated that something they're doing is violating a boundary and they continue to do it, you are training them to treat you poorly. And so you have to determine that you have some control over how they treat you by removing yourself from that relationship. And creating space for another relationship to enter your life that's a lot more healthier.
That makes a lot of sense. And then another issue that I was worrying about, or that I was wondering about, is that we all have friends or loved ones that we know that can be considered like a pushover, that it may be known for getting used or manipulated or, constantly giving out money and things like that. And, if we are a good natured person, and I'd like to think that most of us are, that can be hard to watch. And a lot of times we want to jump in and maybe save the day for that person or help that person out. And I'm just wondering, if we know someone who has poor boundaries, poor limits, and is constantly getting manipulated or used or, violated in some way, how can we support that person?
Well, definitely we want to empower and not enable them. A lot of times, if you're stronger than another person, you want to support them by helping them out, but really empowering them and giving them the tools to really set some boundaries, and really just encouraging them that they're important and they should honor themselves. I think that's the best we can do in most situations. We can support them. A lot of times the person who's a pushover, that comes from a place of, sometimes wanting to be pleased or not wanting to be rejected. And so again, just empowering them to know that they're important enough to set those boundaries.
That sounds good. Just empowering. And from your standpoint, a lot of times people will say, I want to help someone, or, that's why I didn't say no because I want to help someone or whatever. I'm wondering if you can explain the difference between helping and enabling, because I think a lot of people get those two concepts confused.
Yes, you're right. I think that's a good question. As far as, the enabling piece, I think we all know the person who we've helped several times, or the person who is not willing to set a boundary, and then we're bailing that person out. So I think when you're looking at it, helping out, I think you are going to look at, okay, what is the motive behind why you're helping this person out, and then really look at, their ability to be able to resolve the issue themselves. I think that enabling the person does not teach them how to set the boundary. It only teaches them how to depend on you. And so then you develop this dependent relationship with that person, and then you're unable to set a boundary. So not only are they unable to set a boundary, they've pulled you into the boundary dilemma, and then now it's two people not really setting boundaries.
I see. Okay. And so it sounds really good, but I mean, in the way you explain it, it sounds simple. But
It's not.
A lot of people, right? It's not. It's so not. What do you think the most difficult part about learning, or just being able to learn how to set boundaries is for most people? What do you think their biggest struggle is with being able to do that?
I would say the biggest struggle is being consistent. I think we all have this rah, 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 I'm going to set this boundary. I think I'm important. And then when you're faced with a situation that's, either bigger than what you thought it was, or it's a familiar situation, or, in romantic relationships, if it's, someone that, you could set a boundary with one person, but then this person comes along and you're like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to set a boundary this time. So it's really being consistent, but that doesn't come from the boundary setting technique. That comes from having a healthy self-worth and knowing that you deserve the very best in your life. So if it's setting boundaries with food, having some mindful eating techniques to know that, everything you put in your body has an impact on your body. So it affects your brain, and it affects your liver, and your ability to rest well. And so honoring yourself, well, first believing in yourself and loving yourself will start the process in you even wanting to set a healthy boundary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you have to be in a good emotional space. From what you're saying is that you have to be in a good emotional space, and you have to want to be consistent with what you're doing. You have to keep at it, even if it doesn't work out the way that in your mind you hoped it would, or that you were thinking that it would every single time. You still have to stay firm and continue to be consistent with what you're doing, because otherwise
Yes.
it sends mixed messages.
Yeah, it's definitely not, no condemnation or no guilt. So if something doesn't work, you really need to try it again. It's not going to be a perfect science, especially if you have never set boundaries before, or you've set boundaries in one area and you haven't set boundaries in another area. Just not, beating yourself up for not being able to do it. And sometimes what I've had to do is go back and apologize for committing to things that I couldn't do, didn't want to do. That really helps a lot of times when you have apologized for overextending yourself, and then you have to go back and say, you know what, I apologize. I thought I was able to do this, but I am not. And so I think you just practice it. It's really a practice skill set in boundary setting.
Right. And recognizing that you're human, Sounds like, acknowledging
Yes.
you're a human being and you can't say yes to every single thing. Okay, so I was hoping, Latasha, that you would be open to answering a listener question.
That will be fine.
Okay, so I had someone drop this in the email box, and it says, "Hi, Dr. Jones. I recently discovered your Facebook page and it's very intriguing. I can go on for hours about my situation, but to put it plainly, I am the stepmother of a child with a mentally unstable, drug addicted, and narcissistic mother. For years, I, as well as my husband and her whole family, have battled with her and her problems, and I'm just recently realizing her narcissism is the biggest issue. And the others have compounded from that. Religion, as well as losing the custody of her child, or other talks that the family have had with her, have not gotten through to her. She continues her behavior and lifestyle, and I fear that it will never change. I'm not seeking advice on how to deal with the child's mother. I'm actually seeking input on how to help the child, who is now 11. She's witnessed all of this behavior now, and as she comes into young adulthood and has more understanding on things that aren't right, I'm not sure how to approach things with her. I can't lie to her forever, and I'm unsure about how to discuss her mother's issues with her, and I was hoping that you could include this topic. Okay, all right, so essentially what we have here is we have a stepmother who is worried about her stepdaughter because she feels that her stepdaughter's mother, biological mother, has some mental issues as well as some addictions and is all around narcissistic. It sounds like the family has tried some interventions. It hasn't really worked out, and now in her role as a stepmom, she feels like she's obligated to explain what's going on with that child's mother to that child. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that, because we've been talking about boundary setting, limit setting, and for people, to know their role within a certain situation. And this is a prime example of that,
Yes,
I think.
yes, yes. This is a prime example of boundary setting. So definitely the stepmother needs her own support. I think it's important for her to find out, definitely what her stepdaughter needs from her, but to also tread lightly as far as the view she paints of the child's mother. That child is definitely experiencing a lot of trauma. And so the family needs support around managing that trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important for the stepmom to provide love and encouragement and develop her own relationship, and not so much become the therapist in that situation. I believe that that young lady definitely needs her own support, and then within that supportive relationship, the stepmom could possibly participate, because I think she needs just as much support in making sure that she is providing the support for her stepdaughter, but also knowing that this stepdaughter has experienced a great loss,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of abandonment issues, and so the stepmother doesn't want to step over any boundaries, because at this point, this young lady is she's just had some great loss. So the one thing I would say if I was talking to that stepmother is, make sure you get some support for yourself and not try to have all the answers. I think sometimes when you're able to set boundaries and be okay with not having the answers, that's sometimes the best you can do. She feels like she needs to talk to this young lady and explain to her, and that's not exactly her role. I think the young lady needs healing, but that is not the stepmother's role to have all the answers for her. So giving herself permission not to have all the answers would be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. And the one thing I was thinking of, when reading this question was that I was thinking that, she is the stepmom, and I think that it's important that she's acknowledged her role as being the stepmom. The other thing too is that, I think it's important to, when you have family situations like this where someone is just, their life is falling to pieces, or it's falling apart, and you can see the effect that it has on, someone that you care for, as we were talking about before, that it's important to take a step back and definitely be objective and say, okay, well, her mother is obviously having problems, and her mom, this young girl's mother, needs to go take care of what she needs to take care of. But my position here is that I need to be supportive to her and my husband, essentially be a source of support for my family and support them how I can here, by being consistent, right? Because while that girl's mother is obviously caught up, what you can do is focus on being there and being a source of support, and also being a role model for that young girl, because if her mother is not there, she's also going to be looking to you for cues on how to handle that situation, which is why I say, definitely be objective. And when I say be objective, that means not necessarily not talking about that young girl's mother and saying she's got
Yes.
drug addiction, she's got mental illness, and, kind of having those conversations that we can have with family members or friends, where we don't necessarily paint um, people in the best light, and kind of talking about them and saying what she's not capable of and things like that, but just sort of just saying, okay, well, her mother's not able to be where she and fulfill her obligations as a mother. So perhaps I can step up and be the role model that this young girl needs me to be, and be the source of stability as a stepmom. And, I think I agree with you when you were saying that the stepmom needs her own source of support, because that's a lot to support a stepchild, right? Or any child really, but to support a stepchild where everybody, all parents or family members aren't involved, that means that you might have to step up a little bit more than usual, or, be a little bit more like glue and try to hold people together. And so definitely having her own outlet, so that that's not feeding back into the young girl or her husband. And I also think, I like the idea of the whole supportive avenue. But yeah, just making sure objective, supportive, and then just checking in with your own self, making sure that you're keeping your personal biases or your judgments in check. I think that's going to be the best way to do it for you. And in other ways that you can support that girl would be to join a support group for mom.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook is great for that. Social media, scarymommy.com or other, things like that,
Yes.
where you can support, where you can learn how to support children. And I definitely think you can have a conversation with your stepdaughter about her mom, especially if that's something that she's asking. But I would also tread very carefully around that, in terms of making sure that conversation is not educational, but one that's more understanding. That's not judgmental, but is more educational and understanding with her, in terms of, hey, explaining from your position what you see. Hey, your mom's not able to be here. She's got some personal stuff going on. She might have she might be a little bit unstable. It doesn't mean that she's not your mom and she doesn't care about you. It just means that she's got her own stuff going on right now. And those are conversations I would definitely have with your husband, because I also think it's important to, when you're parenting, to have a united front with the other parent as much as possible. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, I agree with you. The stepmother is providing a corrective relationship. And so it's very important for her to focus on her characteristics and her attributes and what she can leave with this young lady as far as being able to show her, the importance of, consistency and trust, and how to communicate, helping this young lady, set boundaries, because if mom has had these problems for a long time, stepdaughter probably has some difficulties with setting boundaries. So also balancing out, teaching this young lady limits and not giving her a pass on not setting boundaries because of things that happened to her in her past as well. So teaching her the importance of, sharing her emotions and expressing her emotions in a way that is healthy. So because I'm sure the young lady, has seen a lot. And so just really teaching her some of the aspects and areas where she may have missed the parenting pieces from her mom. So I believe this stepmother has a lot that she can focus on as far as building skills in this young lady and helping her to be a successful young lady, grow up to have what she needs.
Right. Yeah. And I would agree. And I agree to, basically focus on what she needs. A lot of times we overthink a situation, like you were saying, and think that we have to offer more than what we have to offer. But what does this child need from you, and focus on that as much as what you are able to do for her. That would be my last 2 cents. Yeah. Okay, I like it. And so it's been an engaging conversation, but I'd like to ask you, what are some resources that you would offer for people that have difficulty setting boundaries, or people that want to learn how to be more firm with their boundaries and limit setting?
Yeah, so I have a book called The Dumping Ground. The book is a combination of scenarios that we'll probably all find ourselves in as far as boundary setting scenarios. And then it gives you questions to really think about how to correct those boundary issues that you may have. So that's one resource. And then Dr. Henry Cloud is another very sound author that writes a lot about boundaries. He breaks up his boundaries for individuals, for couples, for youth. And so I think that with his resources and my resource, I think you'll find a wide variety on just challenging questions to help you think about boundaries. For those who are unaware that they have boundary dilemmas, or they are allowing people to violate boundaries, some of these resources will to get you thinking about just areas that you may want to focus on as far as boundary setting.
Okay. All right. And Latasha, one last question. How can people find you? What are your social media handles if they want to communicate with you?
Yes. So my book is on the dumpinggroundbook.com. My website is illuminationcc.com. And I can be reached at either of those locations. My contact number is 678-585-1966. And I look forward to helping them set some boundaries.
Okay, awesome. And then also people are going to be able to chat with you live after the week after we release this episode, right? So if they want to check you out and talk with you more, they can definitely do it in our group live. So that sounds great. I look forward to it. And thank you so much, Latasha, for being on the show.
You're very welcome. Have a good evening.
You as well. Thank you.